Welcome to Litigation Nation. I'm your host, Jack Sanker, along with my co-host and partner, as always, Luke Behnke. Reminder that this is the show we break down the most impactful legal stories, and you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. And we're going to be talking about the Dominion settlement against Fox News, $787.5 million settlement, the largest defamation settlement ever. Luke, what do you got this week?
So the oldest active U.S. federal judge is under investigation over her performance on the bench. And there's a criminal justice crisis in Wisconsin.
All of that and more. Here's what you need to know. Before we get into our stories, we're going to address a listener question that we got from Sue. Our last episode, we discussed some moves by the White House that were going to promulgate different rules that would allow different lawmaking agencies to quantify and put a specific monetary amount or dollar on different natural resources and natural assets, like, for example, forest land or clean water or fresh air, things like that. If you want more details on that, you go back and listen to our last episode. We talk about it a lot there, but that's what this question is based on.
Yeah, so this question came from Sue in Wisconsin, and she asks, Luke and Jack, do you think by quantifying those natural resources, does that make the step to privatizing those resources easier or more attractive to corporations? That's question one. Question two is, what is the negative side to this move to quantify them?
Yeah, I mean, this to me seems more akin to like carbon credits. There is a market for carbon credits. I mean, companies trade them and buy and sell them and everything. And that was a thing that was created whole cloth by the federal government, 10 years ago. So I think that, this is insofar as the government is going to say, hey, these things matter and have value now and are worth X amount of dollars. That is going to immediately incentivize the creation of a secondary market. I have no idea what that'll look like, but like I said, we saw it with carbon credits. There's whole companies now that do nothing other than buy and sell and trade and arbitrage carbon credits. Frankly, that's what Tesla does. So, something like that might happen.
My sense would be it probably hurts because it creates, a cost or a market where one didn't exist before, and now it's another thing that they've got to deal with. And maybe this is something that the IRS or some other bureaucracy is tasked with, making sure that these companies are complying with that. So I don't know that it would necessarily be a good thing for the bottom line. On the other hand, if it's good for society, then I would put it to you that is more important than Nestle's bottom line to me.
When I was reading about this story last week, I was looking into what are the kind of counter arguments to it. And the potential downside to something like this would be probably hindrance to business activity. If the federal government is quantifying certain things and putting a value on, lumber or fresh water or clean air or whatever, that's going to be used by advocates, or whether they're climate advocates or just folks that are concerned about the cleanliness of the drinking water or whatever, as a cudgel against, anyone who may be doing business that would pollute those things. So, I think that that's the reason for the opposition to this move, at least from the perspective of the opponents, which is, it's going to be something, it's going to be more red tape for businesses to get around, especially ones that are working at the bottom end of the supply chain, with water and lumber and agriculture, et cetera. So that's, I think, the pretty obvious fear about the downside.
Yeah, I mean, it's still in its early stages, but I would say, the major downsides, it seems to me, are, sort of larger government, more regulation, less sort of companies doing what companies do, which is, make products and make money off of their products.
Up first, the Dominion voting machine lawsuit that was filed against Fox in 2020, 2021, settled this past week. The total settlement was $787.5 million, the largest defamation settlement ever. First off, and we're going to set aside our politics here as to, this is obviously an ideologically charged issue. But we're going to do what we do here and ignore that. And let's just get into the first part of this, which is you got to hand it to Dominion's lawyers, who were up against Winston and Strawn, which had the defense in this case, and specifically the legendary Dan Webb. Dan Webb is a fellow Loyola alum, go Ramblers, and he gained notoriety for his prosecutions of the Iran-Contra affair back in the 80s. He was the special prosecutor here in Chicago on a number of local cases, like the Jussie Smollett case, for example. Dan Webb is a living legend in terms of civil litigation. So for Dominion to get a win here is a testament to how good a job their lawyers did, which we're going to talk about here in a moment. So Dominion was represented by lead counsel Steve Shackelford, who's a partner at Sussman Godfrey. According to a Bloomberg write-up on the settlement, Sussman Godfrey usually represents big-ticket clients on contingency fees, usually meaning that they take about 1/3 of whatever the settlement proceeds are. So if that's the case here, and we don't know yet, but if that is the case, Shackelford and his firm would be looking at attorney's fees of over $250 million. So good for them. And if you don't know the basic facts of the case, I'll summarize as best I can quickly. Dominion ran the voting machines that were used in certain states in the 2020 presidential election. Donald Trump and some of his surrogates went on Fox News from time to time, spending a lot of time after the November election deriding the voting machines by name, calling out Dominion as a company specifically, saying that they either falsified or intentionally messed with the poll numbers. And that's what Dominion sued for. It was for defamation based on that. So there's a good write-up in the National Review on this, which I'll quote at length here. I think this is a good summary. Quote, if you choose to believe that the 2020 presidential election was stolen, you must also believe that there is a compelling pile of verifiable evidence for some reason was never presented by Donald Trump's presidential campaign and its myriad of post-election lawsuits in November and December of 2020. Further, you must believe that when facing a $1.6 billion defamation lawsuit from Dominion, Fox News never presented any of this evidence as a defense in the defamation suit. Truth, or substantial truth, is an absolute defense in a defamation case. If you choose to believe that the 2020 presidential election was stolen, you must believe Fox News agreed to pay $787.5 million to Dominion in a settlement rather than present any of that evidence. You must believe that Fox News had a quick and easy way to win this lawsuit and simply refused to, even though the news distributor had more than 700 million good reasons to point to this evidence, if it existed. But Fox News did not present that evidence. In fact, Fox Corporation Chairman Rupert Murdoch said under oath that he believes the 2020 presidential election was free, fair, and not stolen. Fox News did not present any evidence contending the 2020 presidential election was not stolen because the 2020 presidential election was not stolen, and there is no compelling evidence that the 2020 presidential election was stolen. Period. Full stop. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. But how is it that Fox News is paying this settlement when the people who were making the accusations against Dominion were guests on the show? They were guests. They weren't Fox employees, right? Does the news show take on liability for the statements of their guests? Usually not. And if you just neutrally report what someone says, you are typically shielded from liability for defamation under the law. However, in this case, it was the hosts on Fox who were making the comments disparaging Dominion. For example, here's a quote from one of Sidney Powell's appearances on the Lou Dobbs show. Sidney Powell says, no, we've seen willful blindness. They have adopted a position of willful blindness to this massive corruption across the country, and the Smartmatic software is in the DNA of every vote tabulating software companies and systems. Lou Dobbs says, yes, and it is more than just willful blindness. This is people trying to blind us as to what is going on. Later, November 8th, 2020, Fox host Maria Bartiromo, who was also interviewing Sidney Powell, said, quote, Sidney, I want to ask you about these algorithms in the Dominion software. Sidney, we talked about the Dominion software. I know that there were voting irregularities. Tell me about that. On November 30th, Lou Dobbs had a lot to say. He said, quote, "I think most Americans right now cannot believe what we are witnessing this election. We have across almost every state, whether it's Dominion, whatever the company, voting machine company. No one knows their ownership, has an idea what's going on in those servers, has no understanding of the software because it's proprietary, yada, yada, yada." So the long and short of it is, it's Fox hosts that were getting Fox in trouble here. It wasn't the guests. The Fox hosts were taking positions and speaking, frankly, directly to the Fox audience and saying what were allegedly defamatory statements about Dominion. Notably, Fox dumped Lou Dobbs in 2021, shortly after these lawsuits were filed. Going back to the National Review Post, the author makes the point that these kind of loose cannon hosts, such as Dobbs, in this case, are costing their employer dearly. Quote, "A loose cannon host who is unpredictable and capable of saying anything, and Fox News is not the only network with on-air talent who fits this description, can end up costing his network hundreds of millions of dollars. That's not just more than the advertising revenue of any one program. That's a large chunk of the advertising sales for the entire network over the course of a year. The cost-benefit analysis of cable news personalities is about to change, and the market for you never know what he's going to say next is about to crash." Unquote. So I think that the effect of this settlement on the cable news that we've all gotten used to seeing over the past, 10 or 20 years or whatever, is going to be pretty widespread. And I sit here today, actually, as the news just came across that CNN just fired Don Lemon, who was on the air for 17 years. And I think even more shockingly, Tucker Carlson was terminated from Fox News. Now, I have no idea why either of these people were let go. I do think from Tucker's perspective, it seems like, and I'm speculating, it seems like it was at least a bit because of the financials involved. Tucker's far and away the most popular cable news host on television. Number two is not even close. He's obviously going to command significant compensation, and Fox has this $780 million settlement to pay, on top of the additional lawsuits that are still hanging out there. Specifically, there's one from a company called Smartmatic, who also had voting machines, who's also suing Fox for, I believe, $2.5 billion. And that lawsuit is, for the same reasons the Dominion lawsuit didn't go well for Fox, I don't have high hopes for Fox's defense team on this one. So I think it's probably money. But in any event, yeah, this lawsuit I think is going to have a significant impact on the amount of leeway that on-air cable news hosts have to kind of spout off what they're going to say or their opinions, etc. And there's some other fallout from the settlement we should talk about. I want to note that the private equity firm that bought a 76% stake in Dominion in 2018, the company's called Staple Street Capital, bought that stake for $38.8 million. So this $787.5 million settlement represents a 1,500% return on that investment, which is pretty good. The Smartmatic case, it's actually for $2.7 billion. And in that case, I mean, Smartmatic is going to have the benefit of all the discovery that had previously been conducted in the Dominion case. Interestingly, Smartmatic has utilized litigation financing to fund its suit. It was recently ordered to turn over that information and discovery. We don't know the details, though. It seems as though Smartmatic, and I would guess, I'm speculating, but I would guess the Dominion case were bankrolled probably by European litigation financiers. So lots to talk about here, Luke, but what's your take on this?
Yeah, so setting aside how nice it would be to be a crowdfunder for that piece of litigation, huh? Betting on the outcome there.
Yeah.
Setting that aside, I've read a lot about this lawsuit and seen a lot on the news, like everyone else has. But I, of course, don't have any sort of independent, facts or anything. I don't know anything about the case or the underlying, facts that gave rise to the lawsuit and, what was going through everyone's mind when they decided to settle. But I think it does set, as all big defamation settlements kind of do, and defamation cases, I always worry about, the chilling effect of the money here, right? And this is a news outlet that had to fork over 750 some $1 million because of comments that hosts made uh, during a show, and I don't. I'm curious I would love to hear. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in boardrooms at CNN, Fox, NBC, wherever, ABC. Um, I'd imagine they're looking at this judgment going, wow, this is scary. That's a big number. And, anytime that anybody out there sort of feels like one of our hosts crossed the line from kind of fact giver to, um, opinion maker or whatever, we're opening ourselves up to these defamation lawsuits. I, I don't know that it's a step in the right direction for free speech and democracy. At the same time, I readily admit that this is a bit of a hot take. I'm still processing this because it is a pretty recent settlement, but I am concerned about the chilling effect money like this has on speech.
So I agree, although with a couple of exceptions. One, I think that there will be lawyers who are now, looking to bring cases like this now that there's a verified success record. So even just that, I mean, even frivolous lawsuits, as you and I know, require time and expense and lawyers and everything else. So, if Fox or CNN or whomever all of a sudden sees an uptick in, nonsense, frivolous defamation cases that'll get dismissed immediately, like that still has a cost, and it's still gonna make these news outlets self-police a little bit differently. um, uh, I wanted to I was trying to find something reliable to get into the damages that Dominion was going to claim at trial, and I wasn't able to do that. I did see that Dominion had like I think had record revenue uh, after the defamatory stuff happened. So like 2021, 2022. But from what I saw, what they're suing for is effectively that, Dominion will never get a contract to provide voting machines frankly, in a red state or red county or red city ever again, based on this. And at least I think that was their theory of the case, right? Which is that our name is trashed to a large portion of our customer base, over something that turned out to not be true. And so our harm here is, whatever those contracts are worth times however many years that they think they would have got it. So, I think that's how they arrived at their initial number of over 2 billion, and that's probably how they calculated this settlement of 787, or whatever. Uh, I think the the distinction here, it's that, and they could have had these guests on who could have said any kind of crazy thing and probably been fine, as I think what it seems like. But it's the fact that the hosts themselves, adopted the positions that the guests were saying, and basically started speaking on behalf of Fox. Um, is it going to have a chilling effect on like news? Yes, absolutely. Um, I would argue, the type of speech that's being chilled here, though, it might be kind of nice for us to not have, you know, uh, like to not have the hot take industry, be the number one revenue generator for these news organizations. Like it would be if this forces the CNNs and the Fox Newses of the world to kind of stick a little more closely to the facts, and keep a little bit less of their opinion out of it. Maybe that's a net benefit for us all. That's just my opinion, though.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So I'm actually going to be on a podcast later this week called The Newsworthy, and maybe it's a question for the host there. As long as there's a blueprint for these folks to do their job, then I suppose I'm fine, right? I mean, But it cannot be the case, and I think you'd agree with me, Jack. It cannot be the case that someone is sort of presenting an issue and letting folks give their opinion on that issue. And then all of a sudden, the network, by allowing these folks to provide their opinion and facts that they see as, as relevant, all of a sudden the network is opening themselves up to a $700 million defamation lawsuit. And again, this situation, I think, was probably different. My sense is that there was probably story after story about Dominion. It wasn't, the questions weren't tell me your opinion, tell me what you think went wrong. It was more of like, an accepted foregone conclusion that there was voter fraud going on here and kind of piling on Dominion. I'm just worried that that's, you can see that there's a distinction to be sure, but it's slight. And I suppose there's a way around that. There's a way to do journalism properly, and that probably didn't happen in this case, and that's why Fox had to stare down the barrel of $2 billion. But cases like this always sort of make me squirm.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it's an uncomfortable, I mean, you don't want to, not everything is a slippery slope, but, this is certainly something that you could, maybe consider talking about in that context. My only thought is like the nature of the lawsuit and the sheer amount of money involved tells me that even Fox didn't believe in their defenses. I mean, of course they didn't admit liability, right? You don't do that when you settle these. There's no admitting liability, but they believe that they were so screwed at trial that they would rather give $750 million than roll the dice. And that, to me, I think, I mean, you can't, technically you can't use the settlement. It's not evidence of guilt, right? But it is evidence of like lack of confidence in their defense position. And I think that Fox's attorneys, who probably have done nothing other than, Dan Webb, for example, who we talked about, if Dan Webb thinks that they don't have a chance at trial, I mean, he knows a lot more than I do. So yeah, I mean, it's a weird one, and it sticks out because of how much money's involved. But at the end of the day, Fox is the one who made this decision to do this. It's not like it wasn't a ruling from a judge. It wasn't a jury. This was Fox saying, mea culpa. And that's, I think, pretty interesting.
And screwed is a legal term of art. Is that right, Jack?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. According to Reuters, a 95-year-old appeals judge named Pauline Newman in Washington, D.C. is under investigation over her performance on the bench. Judge Newman's court, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, handles patent appeals, and Judge Newman is considered a leading jurist on patent issues. This investigation comes after other judges on the court questioned Judge Newman's ability to handle her caseload, and she reportedly declined a medical evaluation, according to internal records the court released on April 14. When asked about the issue of age in her case, Judge Newman wrote in an email to Reuters that an order detailing the investigation last week had mentioned her age, but it, quote, carefully avoided saying this action was taken because of age, close quote. Last week, Judge Newman said of the investigation, quote, I doubt that my elderly colleagues would have joined such a statement, close quote. Be a shot across the bow at her brethren. Now, the nonprofit New Civil Liberties Alliance, that's NCLA, is representing Judge Newman and has asked the court's chief judge, Kimberly Moore, and U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts to move the investigation to a different court. According to NCLA attorney Greg Dolan, who himself is a former clerk for Judge Newman, the general practice has been to move similar proceedings in the past. Dolan, who believes that the allegations against Judge Newman are unfounded, says of the request to move the investigation that, quote, it just makes sense that the people who might serve as witnesses not also serve as adjudicators, close quote. Now, concerns about a judge's competency rarely spill into public, but some legal experts evidently told Reuters that the issue may be increasingly relevant as the U.S. judiciary grows older. Some of our listeners may be surprised to know that there is no mandatory retirement age for federal judges who are appointed for life and can be impeached but not forced to retire. The average age of federal judges recently reached a record high, Jack, of 69. That's according to a 2020 study in the Ohio State Law Journal. Many judges choose to take senior status, which is a form of semi-retirement that's generally offered at age 65 and allows for a lighter caseload. The average age of the 19 senior and active judges on the federal circuit is 71. And besides Judge Newman, there are 5 judges older than 80 on the court, including 2 who are active. Now, this isn't to say that many judges can't continue capably serving into older age. Of course they can. But if anything, this shows that it can be difficult to nudge jurists off the bench if their competency becomes uncertain or an issue. Now, if Judge Newman's competency probe determines that she suffers from a disability, she could be blocked from hearing future cases and a new judge would be appointed to her seat, though she could keep her title and her compensation. The court's decision, as I mentioned earlier, to disclose Judge Newman's case at an early stage while it was still under investigation is highly unusual. The proceedings generally aren't public. And again, confrontations over judges' competence and performance are often handled privately, sometimes through informal conversations involving a judge's family. Only 15 U.S. federal judges have been impeached by the Senate. 8 were convicted, quote unquote, and removed, and 3 resigned. Only one of those cases back in 1804 involved a mental impairment. And for those of you listeners who might be advocating for instituting term limits or mandatory retirement for federal judges, that would require a constitutional amendment. And as you might imagine, such an effort in this divided environment would probably get little political backing. Now, there are also strong arguments for maintaining current hurdles for removal, including concerns that lowering the bar would make judges vulnerable to ideological enemies, or changing political winds and limit the judiciary's independence. So, Jack, there's really, I think, two things here. One, an aging judiciary is real, right? I mean, the objective evidence bears that out. But based on your anecdotal experience, is it a problem? And 2, what's your take on term limits? I, for one, can tell you that I think I'm against it. I think I'd much rather be in front of an experienced judge who may be, declining a bit than someone who, potentially bends to politics. But as someone who litigates often, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, it's tough. I don't even really think we need to get into term limits because it's so far outside the realm of possibility that it'll never ever happen. I don't think that we're going to have a constitutional amendment on that anytime soon. So it's just not. Now, if it could happen, would I be in favor of it? Maybe. I don't know. 95 is up there. 95 is up there, which isn't to say that Judge Newman isn't able to do her job. But if anyone's going to put a term limit on these judges, I suspect that the number would be well south of 95. So she probably would have been retired for 20 years now if there were, term limits. So I don't know. I guess politically it's really dicey though, because if you could do term limits, then of course it's the big issue of who's in office when certain judges' term limits are up, which we already have, especially with the Supreme Court. But it would further, I think, politicize the judiciary because the appointments would all be an election issue as folks are aging out at a given time. So you would know, for example, in the 2028 cycle that like 37 federal judges are all going to automatically retire. And so that's a new component of the election that you'd have to worry about.
Well, and remember getting those people pushed through, Jack, has become a bit of a process. I mean, we've seen recently, judicial appointments, I won't say used to be close to a matter of course, but they weren't nearly as much of a fight as they are these days.
Yeah.
So can you imagine if you've got, like you said, 37 judges leaving in a year, you've got to replace 37. I mean, that would be insane. We've already got a shortage. Talk about a fight. I mean, that would be crazy.
Yeah, that's like all the Senate would be doing, with
Correct.
just confirmation hearings and arguments. That's like that would be 100% of their schedule. Yeah,
Agreed.
no, that's a really good point. It's really the system that we have, which is not a great one, is I think ultimately like the best way to do it, which is you know there's no term limits, but if someone is getting up there and starting to make decisions, everyone kind of pulls them aside and says, "Hey, maybe it's time. Take a step back." Um, informally. But if you have someone who's not willing to do that, you really don't have recourse against them. And here we are. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure this judge is has her side of the case and everything else. But to your point, for this to go public, for this to make it to the public, means that whatever it was that she's being accused of is probably pretty significant for people to leak it the way that it has.
Yeah, isn't that part shocking to you? I mean,
Yeah,
reading the story, that was probably the most shocking thing to me, where it's a fellow judge of yours, a colleague, um, reports reports competency issues. That's tough. I will say this. So, um, I don't, I, I don't think that we have enough judges on the federal bench as it is. I think anything designed to remove the judges we do have probably isn't the direction we want to go. I think what we want to do is find a way to get more qualified people attracted to the bench, and and then we can start talking about maybe separating the wheat from the chaff. But until we get to a point where we feel like we've got a well stocked pond, I think this is the wrong discussion to be having. An article written by Jeff Brown and published in Wisconsin Lawyer, which is the official publication of the State Bar of Wisconsin, highlights the criminal justice crisis in this state and the proposal to begin to rectify some of the funding issues. So I'll give you a quick summary of the article. Wisconsin's criminal justice system is in crisis. Pay for district attorneys and public defenders is set by state law and is too low to attract and keep enough lawyers. And although the COVID-19 pandemic might be waning, its effects linger. Caseloads are up because of the court backlog caused by the pandemic, but the number of prosecutors is down because open prosecutor positions are going unfilled. The funding crunch has also affected the State Department of Justice and the state court system. Two examples are the court system turning to digital court reporters because of an ongoing shortage of stenographic court reporters, and the DOJ's request to add 10 DNA technicians and 4 toxicologists to the state crime lab to process sexual assault kits and other DNA evidence, and to assist law enforcement agencies statewide with an analysis of controlled substances. Now, I won't read this entire article to you. You can go read Jeff Brown's article yourself. It's great. But I will tell you this. The starting wage for an assistant district attorney is $27.74 per hour, which is about $54,000 per year. Now, the paper mills in Appleton, at least as of the time of this article, are advertising entry-level positions that pay more than $27.74 an hour, but demand far less work than than what's required for a prosecutor. Now, the state public defender, that's the SPD, they're in the same boat because the starting pay for a public defender is the same for an assistant district attorney. As far as fixing the problem or proposals to help remedy the situation, the WDAA, that's the Wisconsin District Attorneys Association, has proposed spending $14.4 million to cover market-based pay raises for all assistant and deputy district attorneys. And it's also asking for $4.5 million to cover merit-based pay raises. The SPD, again, that's the state public defender, is asking for $16.5 million to fund merit-based pay raises and to bring the starting pay for public defenders up to $35 an hour, which is what corporation counsel get paid here in Wisconsin. Additionally, the SPD is asking for just under 25 million to cover boosting the hourly rate for private attorney appointments to $125 per hour for in-court work and $100 per hour for out-of-court work, and boosting the travel rate from $25 an hour to $50 per hour. Altogether, the requests made by the WDAA and the SPD total just under $72 million, which sounds like a lot of clams, but really it's only 1% of the state's $7 billion surplus. So, Jack, I know you're in Illinois, I'm up here in Wisconsin. This has become a very real issue. I mean, the title of Jeff Brown's article is Criminal Justice Crisis. The bill is coming due. There are some uh, there are some jurisdictions in the state that just don't have lawyers. And my sense, I can't speak for you, but my sense is, one of the reasons that you became an attorney is because you believe in due process. It's one of the things that separates our system from, every other system in the world, quite frankly. And without these men and women doing their job in the public defender's office and in the district attorney's office, there is no due process for hundreds, thousands of people across the state. And so, if we don't have attorneys doing these jobs, I mean, it's a problem for the legal system as a whole, including guys like me who don't do any criminal work. I mean, a practical example is and I'm sure you've come across this, Jack. Criminal trials will take precedence over civil trials. I dare to say always. And so, if these criminal cases aren't getting tried, I mean, that's a very real backlog that's backing up our cases. I mean, it's bad for the legal system the entire way around. Um, it seems as if the fix is, more money, better pay. So you can keep some of these public defenders in office longer. You can keep some of these prosecutors in the office longer. Because what I'm hearing, and again, this is all anecdotal. I'm not at the center of this. I don't purport to be, but anecdotally, what I'm hearing is, these young folks are coming out of school. They're getting these really high profile cases very early in their careers, earlier than they ever got them in the past. They're getting this amazing, sort of trial experience. And then they're just going to the private side and
Right.
making double or triple, what they were getting paid on the public side. That's a problem, right? You've got to make it so that these folks want to stay on that side, and the system has a fighting chance to sort of retain the good ones. Um, as it is now, it's a mess, and really it's a big problem for the industry as a whole. And so, I'm of course curious to hear your thoughts on this, but this is more of a one of those stories that maybe we're amplifying an issue more than sort of discussing it, because I think there's really only one way to look at it. But what do you think, Jack?
Yeah, I mean, this type of thing kind of grinds my gears. And we have similar issues in Illinois, not being able to properly staff the um, state's attorney. We don't. We're running out of prosecutors. Public defenders have always been overworked and underpaid, and like this is not. And this is what drives me crazy is because this will be framed by certain people as public employees are lazy and they are complaining about their salary and et cetera. And it's like, no, one, that's not true. And if you've met, and I'm sure you have, prosecutors and public defenders are like some of the most technically skilled attorneys you'll come across. They're actually really good at what they do to be able to handle those situations in the volume that they typically are. Like my hat's off to everyone, to all my friends that are PDs and prosecutors, and I have a lot of friends that are in those scenarios. Like those people know what they're doing. First of all, but the net effect of this is like the add-on effects of these backlogs are really like bad. So you have people that are sitting in lockup for months, waiting to be tried because there's no availability to try them, and then you have all these negative externalities there, like maybe a person who is truly innocent, for example, but is facing a 4 months in jail before trial, takes a plea deal just to get out. That's like an unnecessary pressure that is not supposed to be there. You technically have a right to a speedy trial under our system, and we get around that with things like cash bail and options to let people out while they await trial and everything else. But
But
go ahead.
even that backfires, and you know that. I mean, that
Oh
that
yeah,
that was the issue with the fella who drove through the Waukesha parade up
yeah,
here. That he, posted $1,000 cash bail, got out. He probably shouldn't have been out, but he did because there's nobody to
right.
take care of his case, right? And so that's a huge problem on the backside too.
It's like the net effect of this is like bad people that should be locked up are being let out, good people that shouldn't be locked up are staying locked in, and it's like that's really really unfair and
Reverse.
bad for society. It should not happen. And the solution is you. I mean, you would have it would solve so many problems, especially in Illinois where there's this dispute over cash bail and in eliminating cash bail and all of that. And there's people who are obviously concerned about a scenario that, like you mentioned, where a bad guy gets out on cash bail and does, does something wrong. But there's legitimate concerns on the flip side of, people, if you shouldn't have to pay, to get your constitutional right to a jury trial. That's not a controversial or even political statement. You shouldn't. You should be arrested for whatever it is. If you're charged, you should be charged, and then ideally the next day, if there's discovery or whatever, but you should be in trial as soon as possible, and that helps everyone. That helps the safety of, the people around who are, can trust that the system is going to take violent or dangerous people off the streets faster, and it protects the rights of people who are accused that are innocent because they don't have to sit around worrying about trial and getting pressured to make a plea deal. So it's not sexy, but like if there was ever a candidate that could message this right and just say, I'm going to triple the amount of funding for judges, prosecutors, and public defenders. I mean, that person would have my vote.
Yeah, no question. And this statement always gets met by grimaces, but it is one of the reasons that I advocate for or stump for, to whoever will listen, about the need for more attorneys. I mean, we do need more lawyers. Maybe not, and we touched on this in past episodes, Jack. I don't know that urban areas necessarily need more lawyers, but I do think that it's a problem in rural areas where there's literally like no public defenders or no prosecutors in some of these rural areas. And, you've got to increase the pay for these folks so that we keep good people in that role. So I think you need more of them, and you need more of an incentive to keep them on the public side, because without it, the system fails, and we're all part of the system.
Yeah. And even partial failure, which I think we are living in partial failure now. And like you have the Wisconsin driver parade guy, that's the perfect example of a foreseeable, second order effect of this. Like that is 100% foreseeable. The idea that, someone who's violent can get out on bail because there's a backlog of cases and has all the time in the world to then go and do something else horrible. That's 100% foreseeable. And that is just a administrative governing problem. It's not the fault of the prosecutors. It's not the fault of the PDs. It's probably not the fault of the judges. There's just not enough public investment in these institutions, which, frankly, should be a lot higher on people's list of priorities.
Couldn't agree more. That's the show for today. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have thoughts on any of these stories, as always, let us know what you think. Until next time.